All right, thanks everyone for coming. So I'm Daniel Lam, and today I'm going to present my joint work with my advisor Ming Xia, entitled "Noun Phrase Representational Complexity Reduces Maintenance Cost by Increasing Reference Distinctiveness." Yeah. Okay, so I'll invite you to read this sentence. So the dog that chased the cat is very cute. So I have a question for you. So which animal is very cute? So is it the cute puppy or is it the cute kitten? So, all right, puppy, yes. So sorry, Kim, you're not very cute. You're just cute. Okay. So as you, even if you're marginally proficient in English like I am, you find this task very easy. Okay. So we understand the dog is cute, despite the fact that the cat is linearly closer to the verb phrase is very cute, right? You can see the sense again. The cat is right next to it. Okay, and why is this the case? Well, one possible explanation may be, well, thanks to the different working memory processes. Okay, and so the three working memory processes that theorists usually talk about are encoding, maintenance, and retrieval. So let's look at how they take shape in the context of that sense. So when we read this sentence, when we read the word the dog, we encode that word or that concept or that image, whatever thing you believe in, into working memory for use in a later time if needed. And then in the middle period where you don't really need to retrieve it, you store it in working memory where just being stored or being processed through additional syntactic building or stuff like that. And then at the verb is, you have some cues that require you to retrieve the reference that you need. So you retrieve the dog from your working memory and integrate it into the structure you're building for the sense in order to understand that it is the dog that is in fact very cute and not the cat. So in terms of these three processes, in the sense comprehension literature, retrieval integration is relatively well studied. Okay, this is in terms, there's a lot of literature on retrieval interference. It's becoming a cottage industry in sense comprehension. However, this is not the case for the other two processes, encoding and maintenance. I know this is not the case in visual working memory, where maintenance is its own cottage industry. But in sense comprehension, encoding is mostly discussed in terms of contribution to retrieval interference, and maintenance is mostly discussed in the EEG ERP literature, especially with regards to a component called the sustained anterior negativity. However, even in that literature, discussion of the maintenance period remains sparse. So the main question of our work is, what linguistic factors affect working memory processes in these three, for all these three working memory processes, especially the oft forgotten maintenance process. So one of those factors that we look at is complexity. So everyone knows that working memory is capacity limited. Okay, so in order to do, so previous theories have assumed that complex structures increases working memory cost, right? Because it's pushing against that capacity limit. However, there are also work that show that higher representational complexity can reduce working memory cost. Okay, so this is a bit counterintuitive, and I'll show you what this is. Okay, so this is the work of Hofmeister. So he found that complex noun phrases are encoded slower but retrieved faster. So I'll walk you through this example. So it was a communist who the members of the club banned, and there's more to the sense, but at the verb banned, you are retrieving the word communist from working memory, right? So in order to fill in the object position, so that you can understand that the members of the club are bands, the communists, and not someone else. Okay. So what Hofmeister did is he manipulated the complexity of that noun phrase by adding adjectives or nouns before it. Okay, so an alleged communist is more complex than a communist. It has way more semantic elaboration, and an alleged Venezuelan communist is even more complex than an alleged communist. Okay, so with respect to reading time, Hofmeister found slower reading time for the more complex noun phrase. So an alleged Venezuelan communist at the noun communist, he found slower reading time at the encoding phase. So, however, at the verb bands, aka the retrieval site, he found faster reading time for the more complex noun phrase. Okay? So why is this the case? So there are many possible factors, but some of these possible factors are, one, maybe when you spend so much time and effort and attention encoding this noun phrase, the complex noun phrase, into working memory, it increases the salience for this noun phrase or increases the attentional resources devoted to this noun phrase, and make it much easier to be retrieved. Another alternative explanation, which is not mutually exclusive with the first one, is when you have more semantic elaboration when it comes to this noun phrase, it makes it more distinct from competing noun phrases that you need to retrieve from working memory, and thus leads to less retrieval interference and easier time retrieving. Okay. So, however, big mystery is what happened in between. So what happened in between the word communist and the verb band? There have been no discussion of that. So what is the effects of maintaining complex representations? So the goal of our study is firstly to conceptually replicate the reported effects of noun phrase complexity in both the encoding region and the retrieval region. So AKA slow down during the encoding region and the speed up during retrieval region. And also to explore the effects of noun phrase complexity during the maintenance region. So we achieved this through two experiments. They are self-paced reading experiments. And both experiments have a 2x2 design. So it's noun phrase type. So NP is noun phrase. Complex or simple cross with relative clause type. Subject relative clause is object relative clause. So I'll show you what the census look like in a minute. So we have 36 experimental items and 36 filler items. And all census are followed by a comprehension question to ensure that participants are paying attention. So these are the subject relative clauses. So I'll walk you through the complex conditions. So those emotional crash survivors who dutifully assisted Sophia last week joins the meeting. So the simple condition is exactly the same as the complex condition, except that the noun phrase now have two fillers modifier. Actually, it has no modifiers at all. It has no emotional, no crash. Okay, so we define survivors as the encoding site, assisted as the retrieval site, where you need to retrieve survivors from your working memory, and whatever in between is the maintenance site. Okay, so the object relative clauses condition are the same, except now Sophia moved forward in front of dutifully. Okay, so the survivors become the objects of the verb assisted and not the subject of the verb assisted. So this is the results. So in case you're not familiar with reading time results, so the y-axis is reading time. Okay? In this case, I residualize and log transform reading time data. And then the x-axis are the words in the sense, and I presented here the 4 different conditions. The red lines are the complex conditions, and the blue lines are simple conditions. So I'll walk you through the the three different sites. Okay, so the encoding in the encoding site, we found no effects of noun phrase complexity at encoding. So if you remember the work of Hofmeister, this is not consistent with the previous results. So in retrieval, we indeed found a speed up due to noun phrase complexity. This is weaker, but it's still there. Critically, during the maintenance site, on the adverb dutifully, we found faster reading times when the noun phrase is complex. More importantly, we found a weak interaction where the facilitation effect is more pronounced in object relative clauses. So you can see that the difference between the solid lines are bigger than the difference between the dotted lines. So, but it's important to note that I did a post hoc test, and both the differences in SRCs and subject relative clauses and object relative clauses are significant. So the differences still exist in subject relative clauses, albeit smaller than in object relative clauses. Okay. So you might wonder why. So we've hypothesized that the difference is due to the different number of reference between these senses. So if you look at subject relative clauses at the adverb dutifully, there's only one available referent in working memory, right? So there's only survivors. Okay. However, in object relative clause, now you have two with the addition of the relative clause subject, Sophia. So we hypothesized that making the target noun phrase semantically rich by adding these modifiers like emotional and crash helps maintain the distinction between the target noun phrase and the competing noun phrase, Sophia, and thus giving the object relative clause condition a more pronounced facilitation effect. Whereas that difference is not as pronounced in subject relative clause because there's no competition between the reference. So we test that hypothesis by designing the second experiment where we added an additional level of embedding so that now in both subject and object relative clauses, you see both have at least two competing references. Okay, so I'll show you what that is. So these are the stimuli for experiment 2. So they are exactly the same 72 senses. However, now you will have noticed that after the word who, I have inserted Jennifer thinks into all of the conditions. So in the subject relative clause, before the adverb dutifully, now you have two competing reference, survivors and Jennifer. In the object relative clause, now you have three. Right, so survivors, Jennifer, and Sophia. So let's look at the result for experiment 2. So this is the big picture for the results, and I'll focus on the individual regions again. So during the encoding sites, now we found a slowdown when matrix noun phrase is complex. So this is consistent with the work of Hofmeister and contrary to the first experiment. In the retrieval region, we found speed up when matrix noun phrase is complex. So this is consistent with both the first experiment and with the work of the previous work. During the maintenance region, so there are two main effects during this region. So at the verb things, we found faster reading times when the noun phrase is complex. And on the adverb dutifully, we found faster reading times when the noun phrase is complex. However, unlike the first experiment, we no longer found an evidence of an interaction. So why is this the case? So at things, there are two competing references in both types of relative clauses. Well, it hasn't even, the difference between the relative clauses hasn't even emerged at this point. So we would expect that complexity makes the target noun phrase more distinct and thus cause the facilitation effect anyway. So this is indeed the case. And at the adverb dutifully, now there are at least two competing reference. So there's competition now in both cases. So again, complexity makes the target noun phrase more distinct, but having the additional referent in object relative clause doesn't seem to help. So let me summarize. So during the encoding site, we saw a slowdown that was observed in Hofmeister only in one of the two experiments. If you notice that the encoding sites, for the encoding site, the material is the same up to that point in both experiments. So we have not done further experiments to test this, but the effects might not be robust enough and might be subjected to individual differences between participant groups. It's possible that for experiment 2, we might just get a group of participants who have higher working memory capacity or stuff like that. Retrieval is pretty consistent. So we found speed up in the retrieval site when the noun phrase is complex in both experiments. So we conceptually replicate previous works. And then most importantly, during maintenance, we found speed up in the maintenance site when the noun phrase is complex in both experiment 1 and experiment 2. And this effect is more pronounced when you have competing reference in working memory. So what does this suggest? So this suggests that representational complexity facilitates maintenance by increasing distinctiveness between reference, and the very existence of the difference between subject relative clause in experiment 1, even without the competition, suggests that other factors besides increasing distinctiveness, such as increasing salience or attentional resources, might also play a role in this process. Well, that's the end of my talk. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a nice day.
I have a question. So if I understand correctly, the target concept that you're interested in is the maybe the difficulty of how difficult it is to maintain some entity in your working memory. But the thing that is not that clear to me is how the reading time metric is linked to the concept that of the difficulty of maintenance. Would you mind further clarify the specific linkage between the reading time data and the difficulty of maintenance of something in your working memory? Thank you.
Yeah, it's possible. Thank you for the question. So it's possible that this is probably the reason why you don't see much maintenance data at all in self-paced reading data, and people often resort to EEG data to look at this because it's so hard to probe the maintenance site with reading time. My 2 cents might be when you have when you're putting more demand during maintenance, aka you are doing some extra processes to keep the representations distinct in your working memory, you are doing that additional processes and putting extra effort into that. And that show up as extra reading time during just the words in the middle. But that's I have no data to show that, but yeah, that's a possible explanation for what you're asking.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you, everyone.